recording.
But going back to your question, so that the feasibility study was done in about 2010. The Glentarkin Bridge was put in 2013, and then we've been doing phases. There's a stretch from St Fillan's towards Comrie that was literally non-existent. So the route between Comrie and St Fillan's uses a back road and then comes onto the railway track. But there was a section that was completely missing. But now as I say, we've found a way round the farm. So now the link between St Fillan's and Comrie is intact and really good. It's obviously off road apart from the back road, but it's a minor lane. And we've turned that actually into a walking and cycling friendly road, but the rest of it's on the railway track, so it's perfectly safe and usable and because the thing about railway track beds is the inclines are fairly comfortable for pushchairs, mobility scooters, and obviously children cycling and stuff like that. So
okay, Jeff, we've got a great question here from Kelly, which is how did you manage to get the landowners all on board?
I think that's the hardest part. We're lucky in that the majority of the track is on Drummond Estates, and they've been again incredibly supportive of the project. Some other landowners aren't quite so enthusiastic. I think what you find is they're quite happy for people to walk along the path, but as soon as you bring in the aspect of trying to develop it and therefore promote it and therefore have more people, I think some landowners are slightly hesitant, shall I say. Other landowners are actually just dead against it, so you have to try and work a way through. I think one of the other most difficult elements is getting everything lined up. So all the landowner agreements, the planning permission, the designs, the route, and then get the funding and getting everything in place, in a logical sequence.
Okay, well, that's great. I think the landowner issue we might come back to at the end of all four presentations, because I think that's a question we'll be asking everybody. So I'm going to move over to Alan, if that's okay, and let me just get Alan's presentation up on screen. Okay, and we'll get going with Alan's one. So if you could just somebody give me a thumbs up that they can see. I'm slightly nervous because I can't see what you can see.
Yeah, that's good.
Good, great. Alan, over to you. Alan, you might have had your mute on actually. Maybe you're still on mute.
I'll start again. Our history in South Plain parallels the one Jeff described in years. So in 2011, we also did a community action plan, and it was a joint effort between the Community Council and the newly formed Development Trust at that stage. And amongst other things, it featured path developments, which were given a high priority, developments within the village envelope itself. And at that point, we formed a path development group, which was a group within the Development Trust. The Development Trust is important, of course, as a registered charity for raising funding. And we set out to, I suppose, develop a strategy. We inherited a rather degraded set of core paths within the community, many of which were virtually impassable, but we had, you can see the top left there, the railway path, But the word railway path indicates we also have in common with St. Fillan's a railway line, a disused railway line that goes right through the length of the village and links us back to Kirkintilloch in the southerly direction, and potentially, although not yet quite effectively, out towards Dumgoyne in the north. So we set out to put together, I suppose that, I'm trying to compress this, one of the early things we discovered was feasibility studies were very important in getting these path developments going. And we're very fortunate in coming across Richard East of the City Design Co-op in Glasgow, who by chance had also been a member of the team that had done a feasibility study in 2004 of the old railway line, which was being looked at as an extension or development of the West Highland route at that point. So Richard, we got some funding to start us, and Richard did some feasibility studies of developing the railway line route, which had major problems, including missing bridges, not over a stream in this case, but just a farm bridge which had gone. So there's quite a bit of earth movement required in this path. This was all done in 2012. And one of the first lessons with these path projects is they take longer than you ever imagined to actually make effective. So we didn't actually complete that project until 4 years later in 2016. And that was 600 meters of the railway line going between Strathblane and Blainfield, with a top track bound surface, largely funded by Sustrans, with support from a number of other funders. And again, the funding experience points to some of the issues with funding. I would say that path projects involve planning and opportunism. And in the academic world, we used to talk about a crock of gold syndrome, where we kept our eyes to see where the money was to go for. And we were very lucky in this case because this project cost £132,000. And the community links program at Sustrans was running, that was extremely big for it. And they did a match funding approach, which would have required us to find half that money from others. Fortunately, in negotiation with Sustrans towards the end of their financial year, we discovered that their long distance footpath project, cycle path project fund had money left in it, which they were quite keen to get rid of before the end of the financial year. And that allowed us, that again is another lesson in the opportunities that come up. Funders are often quite happy to be generous with their funds towards the end of the financial year, since they don't want to not spend their money that the government has given them over that period. And that was our first bit of luck in relation to that path. Land ownership hasn't been a difficulty for us. We were fortunate in that Scottish Water, that runs the pipeline, two pipelines into the village, one from Loch Katrine and one from Loch Cannon direction, owned the old railway line and were quite cooperative. It was a rough footpath anyway, and there was no problem of the ownership permission. And at this stage, we didn't require any planning permission either, because it was an existing path that we were developing. So in those respects, we were quite fortunate. Latterly, we moved on to the last project really in this 10-year period, which completed that link at least as far as Station Road in Blainfield. And there we had to go across a piece of land which hadn't been developed as a path and required planning permission, and was owned by Duntreath Estates, who on the whole were quite friendly towards the development of what was essentially 100 meters of path. So I have a document which I've actually passed to Anne Michelle, which is entitled Strathblane Community Development Trust Path Development Strategy. And one of the things we learned is that planning and strategy is best done retrospectively in these cases. So this document, although it covers the period 2011 to 21 and lists the 6 or 7 projects that we've done around the village in that period, wasn't actually formally put together and made public until about 2017-18. But it looks quite good in retrospect. The other important, I think, elements of this whole exercise include, of course, community support and community consultation in the whole exercise, which began in our case with the Community Action Plan in 2011. That was reviewed twice. We were very fortunate to get good cooperation with Stirling Council, who in those days had an excellent access officer, Richard Barron, and he and his colleague actually came and did a review, which produced a 35-page report of the path needs of our community, which again involved a lot of consultation with community members and gave us a good basis of on which to go to funders over the period. So I think I've probably covered the general issues. I'm trying to get through this within the 10-minute scope that I've been given. I think one point to make about path projects finally is that it's easy, relatively speaking, to get funding to make paths. But one of the problems is the maintenance of paths in the longer term, where in the past, at least, it hasn't been easy to get funding to repair and to maintain paths. And that's where volunteer involvement in the community becomes increasingly important, I think. But perhaps I could leave it at that. I'm sorry, it's a bit garbled and I can't cover in detail all of the projects that we're talking about here.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Alan. I'll just look to see, we've got some quick questions. So I see that, well, this is probably not going to have a quick answer, that Tim has asked about the roughly the cost per mile of creating a path on a non-railway bit.
On a non-railway
section of land, because he says you mentioned 132,000 for 600 meters.
Well, the last 100 meters, Sustrang's requirements changed. As I said, top track was the surface, the bound surface we put on the original path. By the time we got to do the additional link bit of 100 meters, they required, in effect, tarmac. And we didn't like tarmac, but we had to go along with it. We actually put a further bound surface to make it look a bit more rural on top of that. And the whole thing cost close to £80,000 just for the 100 meters. So the actual cost per meter is hugely increased in that respect. But I think it varies very considerably depending on the site that you're on and the preparatory work that's needed and what surface you want to end up with and so on. Yeah. We also had to put railings across a road bridge for people to cycle alongside, because there's a danger apparently that cyclists will fall over the parapet of road bridges into the River Blaine, we were told, which I suppose is a reasonable health and safety factor. So these are costly elements that had to be added to that particular project.
So Alan, Wendy's asking, what is top track?
Top track is, it's old road planings, which are, I don't know the technicalities, melded together to make a bound surface. They look much rougher. They fit better into a rural context, and they're much cheaper than new tarmac going down. But we found so far that they've worn relatively well, although we have a few problems on the path, which are not really the result of the top track surface, but of other factors.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, obviously we'll come back to, there's a few other questions in there as well, but I'll maybe come back to some of those after all the presentations. So moving, let me shut that down, moving across to Jeff in Garganic. Let me make sure I'm making the right one. Oops, have I not got it open? Right.
Yeah, I'll maybe just start while you're trying to get the slides up. Probably the second slide we could start with, not just the cover picture.
Oh,
We're slightly different to the first two presentations in that we've got nothing on the ground as yet. We're at a much earlier development stage. But the early stages were similar to the two presentations you had already. Various community surveys from both the Community Council and the Trust had identified a cycle path from Gargunnock to Stirling as a high priority. The Trust then set up it was a path development group. It covers both footpaths in the area and the cycle path. And we then realized that we were going to need some professional help to identify the appropriate routes and cast about for funding sources, eventually alighting, as with others, on Sustrans, and had to prepare a business case. Those who are familiar with the Sustrans portal, it's not the easiest online piece of software to deal with, and you have to, make a case of what the potential benefits of this route might be, etc., etc. We then went out to tender. I got three bids back in, and I eventually chose a contractor called SWECO, SWECO. But before we actually started any work, we met with the landowners. The route from Gargunnock to Stirling covers two major estates, the Gargunnock estate and the Took estate. There are tenant farmers within these two estates and two other separate farms as well. It was with the estates that we met around a table before we started anything to explain what it was we were trying to do, and to basically get their permission for the feasibility studies to be carried out on their land. They were not terribly keen on the idea, but were prepared to allow at least the feasibility study to go ahead on the basis that we said, well, it may come back and say that this is a non-starter. I mean, it's totally open. We're going to look at all the issues and see if anything is possible or not. And I think on that basis, that at the end of the day, we might have said, this is going to be too expensive, or it's just not going to be feasible. So we then went ahead and commissioned the feasibility study. If you can do the next slide, please, and what we came up with was three options. Our initial thoughts, and many before us had thought that the old railway line would be the best option. That's the on the line is the blue, would be the blue line, I think, on the screen. But it's on a sort of stylized way anyhow. And two other routes, one to the north of the existing main road, A811, and one to the south. To cut a long story short, the consultants concluded that on terms of the Sustrans criteria, the railway line route would be the best one. But when we got into consultation with the farmers, they weren't having it. They claimed that there were also a number of bridges down, but the main reason was that this was now in use. That some of them actually incorporated it into their field. It's unclear, in fact, who owned, whether they did in fact own some of this, the solum of the old rail line. But anyhow, they moved stock and did other things with it instead. That really they didn't want us anywhere near that. So we were then forced back onto the less desirable option in terms of walker and cyclist experience, in terms of well, we ended up north of the railway line, as north of the main road, as the option they prefer. Although there was more verge on the south side, there were more farm accesses there. The key issues with them have been farm accesses and getting, obviously, gates getting in and out. They're going in and out of there, very frequently. The proposal that they have now agreed with us is that the route will be, it won't be on the carriageway edge, it will be inside the hedge. So there will be a metre or so gap between the main road, which is a very busy main road. The existing cycling experience on this road is pretty poor. So that was one of the arguments in terms of road safety, why we needed an off-road route. Okay, so I think maybe if we would go to the next slide, where we are now is that we've been on this for 4 years, but given what two previous speakers have said, they're seem to be sort of into 10 years of their project. So we know we've got a fair way to go before we get anything on the ground. Using the Sustrans, those who know Sustrans know they have a very formulaic set of stages that you have to go through to get their release funding from one stage to the next. We're now at concept design, which is quite detailed. I'll show you some drawings that we have to do just after this slide. We've now agreed with landowners that we can proceed to the next stage. Although still a lot of work to do on the detailed design of gating and this sort of things. On the portion of the road parallel to the 811, we went through a bit of a loop with them. They originally wanted all the accesses from the 811 into the fields. The cycleway set back 25 meters into the field, so the big lorries taking the hay off could pull in off the A811. This would have caused great, huge loops on every axis along the A811. Maybe 7 accesses with these great loops would have made the cycle path very unattractive. But in the end, they've agreed that we don't have to do that, but there'll be double gates each side of the cycleway. We were advised by Stirling Council because we weren't really on their radar in terms of getting active support, that we should get the local politicians, national politicians on board for us. And we wrote to them all, explaining what we were trying to do, all came back very positive. The other aspect is this is really only the first leg of a much longer route, which has appeared in various documents, one of Nature Scotland, another one of Stirling Council's city region bid of something called the King's Highway, which allegedly is the old route between Stirling Castle and Dumbarton Castle. So we would go along the coast and then pick up National Cycle Route 7 at Drimmen or Cockcroft Tammy. But this would strengthen the business case. Obviously, the likely tourism and other benefits would be much greater from greater use along the length of the path than just the Gargunnock to Stirling link. Although the Gargunnock to Stirling link has got a bit of active travel possibilities that some people might actually, especially with electric bikes, cycle to the railway station. We're now in the stage of having to prepare community engagement plans and the baseline monitoring information to be able to prove what impact the path has actually had when it's actually up and running. Okay, next slide, please. perhaps I should say the length of the cycleway, the Gargunnock to Stirling leg, would be 7.3 kilometres. We stop just before the motorway bridge. From then on into Stirling is Stirling Council's responsibility to deal with. Okay, these are just for those who don't know. This is what concept design drawings look like. We've got on the top left-hand one, there's a minor road into Gargunnock. The Gargunnock estate wouldn't let us go through their land immediately off the A811. But we do go through a bit further on, but we're going to have to use a bit of this minor road, which has really only got a single carriageway. So we're going to need to have a separated cycle path on the edge of the carriageway between that and the hedge, and possibly widen the existing single carriageway road. We also have to cross over the A811, which is why initially the southern side of the A811 would have been a lot better. We wouldn't need to cross over. But just before the junction with the minor road, we're going to have to cross over with as yet undefined. I think there will be advanced signage, possibly a raised carriageway. We're not entirely sure about it yet, and still have to get agreement from Stirling Council on that. So that was just to show you really the sort of level of detail of drawings that are required for this stage before you get into detailed design and then on to the construction stages. So again, a lot of common features with the first two presentations. Getting landowner trust and preparedness to engage. In fact, we have two consultants. Sweco are mainly the technical consultant. We've got another consultant called Viv Wood G, who has a lot of experience on farming background, talking to farmers, and we thought she would be better at gaining their confidence and talking in their sort of language. So we've used her for that. We've had lots of ups and downs on the thing. Taken a long time for estates often to get back to us as to whether we can move to the next stage. Understanding Sustrans requirements isn't always entirely straightforward. This basic need for the carriageway to be suitable for an unaccompanied 12-year-old. Initially, we thought that the back road into the village would be enough, but they then decided it wouldn't be, and we had to find a route to the Gargunnock estate. I say timescales for landowner responses, it can take forever. Stirling Council, there's a great deal of willingness there, but staff shortages mean it's been very difficult for them to give us any practical help. And we do need them for the next stages of explaining to landowners who's going to do the maintenance and who's going, and this, drawing up the legal agreements, etc. We haven't at this stage, although the community is aware that we're doing this work, we haven't had a consultation because we are aware that, in fact, there will not be route options which are offered to the community. We're not going to ask them where they think the route should go, because that won't be an option. We'll have had to get landowner agreement where to go. If we go back and say, well, where would you like to go? We can't redo all the landowner discussions again. So it will be a limited consultation. And of course, getting finance, apart from whatever Sustrans are going to put in, is going to be an issue, which is why we're into this sort of King's Highway project. I don't know if you want to do the key lessons or just circulate those later on. I think I've gone a bit beyond my 10 minutes. But patience, persistence, landowner acceptance. You need a team. There's 3 of us dealing with this. People can deal with different things. Need for flexibility. As I say, we wanted the railway line route, but we had to settle for something which was second best. Flexibility, focus on outcomes. Have good working relations with the consultants. You're going to trust them for a lot. Obviously, Sustrans financial technical support is important. And as I've mentioned, the need to manage community consultation, not raise expectations that things can be delivered which can't. Okay, that was a bit of a quick but I hope that's been useful.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That was very comprehensive. Right, more questions, lots of questions coming in. I am thinking we maybe move straight on to Bridget, if that's okay, and then we'll come back with you, Jeff, with the questions. You seem to have generated quite a lot of questions there. Let me shut that one down. And Bridget, I'm just going to open up your one.
Thanks.
Let's see if I can.
Just before I start, it's great to hear your progress at Gargunnock, because I was on the Castle Stirling partnership and we were talking about, we were having those initial conversations with the farmers and suddenly realized they were going to be a bit of a problem then. So I'm full of admiration with what you've done. So well done.
Yeah, we're still a long way to go, but yes.
Yeah, I know, but as you say, it's persistence, and
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
And we have to do it for ourselves, because we know what we want, and we know, we have to just keep bashing along.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm a volunteer, well, retired from Dunblane. I volunteer with Susterns, actually, which has been an interesting experience over the years, but on the whole, I enjoy what I do with them. I'm also volunteer for Dunblane Development Trust, and I'm in the Cycle Stirling network, and I'm a community rep on the Leader Management Group, so I do know Anne Michelle pretty well by now. And I was asked to talk about my experiences in Dunblane on the Glen Road conservation. Right, well, when I retired, I got involved in a climate challenge funded project. And a couple of the aspects of that was creating a green travel map. There's an element of that on the left-hand side there. And that's to help, it was to help encourage people to walk and cycle around Dunblane and the area. And we're on our 3rd edition now, hard copy, and it's online on Dunblane Info. Another section, whilst we were consulting on this map, very much about where are people going, where do they want to go, what are the issues about the routes. We had an improvements report, which highlighted how people could get to school, to work, to the shops, to services, public transport, to social events, their friends, and what improvements they wanted to see. And Glen Road was number 38. And this was particularly close to my heart because I lived on Glen Road and it was my cycle route into Stirling, going through the Kippenrake Glen. It is a key heritage route from Dunblane to Bridge of Allen through Kippenrake Glen, which is an SSSI and an SAC now, some European significance. But it was closed in 1987 due to landslides. It's a very narrow gorge with boulder clay on top of it, and it's very unstable, basically, and it hadn't been maintained properly for years. So that was closed, and the community fought very hard before I got involved to retain it for walking and cycling, because Stirling Council didn't want responsibility for this unstable road, and they wanted to return it to 3 landowners. But it was actually Bridge of Allen Community Council who fought to get that retained for public use. But by 2011, it was very waterlogged and narrow and swamped with vegetation. Perhaps you can go on to the next slide, please, Anne Michelle. That shows you some examples of what the road looked like in 2011. Getting very narrow as well. So I had an engineering friend who, yes, this was before there was much money around in Susterns. So I asked an engineering friend if he had any suggestions, civil engineer, and he popped through my door a contractor's quote, estimate for under £10,000. We're talking about a kilometre route here. So it's on a slightly different scale. I gave Stirling Council and Susterns this estimate, and he had a plan for improving the drainage and scraping back the roots and vegetation, very basic. And they were keen to make the route continue as part of National Cycle Network 765 between Stirling and Doon, going through Dunblane. So basically, we were sort of making them an offer that they really had to take notice of. Susterans offered £5,000. Stirling Council, of course, said they had no funds. So I piped up saying, okay, as a community, we're going to raise the rest of the funds. And we raised £4,500. And Richard Barron, wonderful Richard Barron, offered to get the permissions, that's Richard from the Stirling Council, and to coordinate the works if the volunteers maintain the ditches and vegetation. So that's where we were roped in. So do you want to go on to the next slide, please, Anne-Michelle? So this is what it's looking at like. We were doing the annual leaf blowing. We had quite a few landslides from above, which we cleared. And it looks beautiful with bluebells. And we had an opening ceremony at one stage as well. I got funds for an information board on the heritage and nature along the route. It's got 6 conservation designations. It's part of the Sheriff Muir battlefield. It was involved in the Redcoats trying to escape because they couldn't cross the gorge. Lots of interest. Oh, Monty Don's ancestor. He was an apprentice clockmaker in Dunblane, and he was much more interested searching through the glen for mosses and bryophytes. So it was just trying to capture some of this information on the information board and to engage the community. Now, if you go on to the next slide, please. By 2019, we were having some issues with erosion on one of the narrowest points. So again, I asked my volunteer engineer, it's all voluntary, of course, and he suggested repairing more of the Victorian drainage. And we didn't, Richard Barron had left by then, but because we'd got momentum from maintaining it and got some sort of credibility, he was able to get the permissions himself and get a project manager and make use of whatever funds we could raise, basically. We had an initial budget of about £25,000 that it had to get extended because we had some issues of trying to look at the drainage above the route from the fields. And I managed to raise, I mean, I'm quite proud of this really, £46,500. Didn't expect to do that from previous and new funders. And we had a community appeal which raised £6,500 because it was so much loved. And we managed to complete this work just before lockdown. And boy, was it popular because it was so nice and wide. And we'd had one of the funders wanted a survey. So we did an online survey and we did a manual survey between 3 of us whilst we were walking up and down during our lockdown activities. And we counted 650 people per day using the route. And we've got a report there. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Anne-Michelle. Oh, that's just telling you what I've just said, really. I like, yes, that was the training. And this is just some of the volunteers working, different jobs that we've been doing. And then the next one, please. Just showing you what it's like today. And it's all nicely signed by Susterans, nice and wide. And my last tips, really. Yes, find out what are the community think are the key routes. Get the support from the key people, not everybody, but just the key people who can make it happen. We were very proactive in the technical and funding solutions and really made offers that everybody couldn't refuse. And just being persistent, really. It's not been easy. Nothing's easy with routes like this, but it's about persistence and just using what you have really, and the expertise and skills you have. We were very lucky because we were doing it when sustenance didn't have any money and didn't really have many regulations. We just put our suggestions, and they were very supportive at that time. So we were a bit lucky. We were before they had all the money and they had to justify it, how they were spending it, and standards have gone up a lot. But I mean, our route is all ability. It's a brilliant route. Everybody uses it and loves it. So that's me.
Thanks very much, Bridget. So hopefully, I mean, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour in all corners of our area, really, of different cycle. I am told by my access friends that there is no such thing as a cycle path. It's a path that anybody can use. So Bridget's point about the all abilities is actually, probably a better way of describing. And obviously, if you can get a bike on it, you can probably get pretty much anything else on it as well. Feel free. We've still got some time to go, because I've got something I want to share with you. Oh gosh, we are soon to finish up. We'll maybe just come back to some of the questions for our 4 speakers who've agreed and are still here, thankfully, to answer any questions. Anyone's got any questions they'd like to ask, you can put your hands up or wave. If you've got your camera on, actually, I won't see you otherwise. But we do have some questions in the chat, so I'm going to see if I can retrieve the questions. Let's have a quick look. But if anyone else wants to jump in whilst I was quickly check the questions. Right, so there's a question here from Moira. Moira, I'm not sure if I can see you, but it was to do with drainage. So actually, this is quite an interesting one, because Bridget, you mentioned about the drainage with Glen Road. I'm not sure if this is targeted at a particular speaker, but it was talking about the drainage. How do you manage drainage, particularly if fields around the path have another landowner? So I think it's when you have like multiple landowners which you're crossing with your path, and if you've got drainage going from one to the other. Would anyone like to jump in with an answer to that, or some thoughts on how you deal with that best?
Well, actually, we have got serious issues with drainage from the fields above Kippenrake Glen, which are causing that instability. And yes, the landowners did have to be approached by our volunteer engineer, and luckily, because we were doing that later after having done the initial work, they were on, they weren't going to sort of say no, but all these conversations are quite difficult. They're much more challenging than you assume they will be initially. So I don't know what the answer is. You just have to talk to people and explain what the issues are, and hopefully, but every situation is so different. You've really just got to get to know your stuff, perhaps get people who are experts to look at things and understand what can be done and what should be done. I mean, I'm not sure I'm helping there, but we had to address some of those issues ourselves, yeah.
So Moira, I don't know if you've got a particular route in mind. Where are you anticipating drainage being a problem?
Sorry, Strathbley and Blainfield, the one that Alan was talking about, and it's a problem that we have about we've got water comes down, we've got our path, but then there's a field which is a slightly lower level, and there's a burn at the far end of that field. Now, the obvious line is through this field and into a boggy area, but we don't own the field. It's the water board, as Alan was saying, owns the path. But if one owned the field, you would actually put drainage into the field. But it really then is a landowner responsibility.
Okay.
And I think that's a frustration, because you can see it because it lies in the path. I was just wondering if anybody had a magical solution for that, if anyone had come across that. Because as I say, the obvious thing would be drainage through the field into the boggy area and the burn.
I've got one suggestion: boardwalks can be used on boggy areas.
Yeah, I think it's actually because the path itself gets damaged, and if you own the field, so the path just keeps crumbling. So we want to repair that. But if we owned the field, we would actually put drainage in through the field, because that would be the logical thing to do. But it's up to a landowner to.
Well, unless, I mean, it depends how flush Sustrans are feeling, whether Sustrans would consider the cost of the drainage, even if it's a field owned by somebody else.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Because normally it lands on the landowner, so why should they pay however much? But I was curious if someone like Sustrans would pay to maintain the road for the drainage in a third party's field. I'll have a think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be one for a discussion with Sustrans or whoever the funder is. I'm just thinking that I know some on the call will be familiar with a discussion we've been having with Stirling Council. In fact, that's Wendy. I just put her hand up with Stirling Council on a piece of land that's owned by somebody else. And actually the council is covering the cost of some of the culvert related. But Wendy, do you want to come in on that point, or is it a different point?
Mine was a broader point, actually. I can't help with the drainage at the moment.
Come in anyway. Let's come in.
So yeah, mention was made of the King's Highway, which one council officer we met described as, well, I think I picked up her lead and described it as the Republican highway, but no doubt that won't stick. I'm just interested to know if how many of the people who are here today are potentially interested in that or on its putative line, and thinking that I think I gathered somewhere there is a group, but is it mostly Garagunic people? You know, should we be extending that group in terms of thinking about the bigger project? Is there a way of making that happen?
Yeah, there is a King's Highway Development Group. It just had a meeting, in fact, a couple of days ago. It comprises Gargunnock, Clivey, Kippen, Balfron, and Killearn.
Okay.
At the moment, there's nobody from Arm Prior as yet, but we're there's basically they're all things happening at different stages along the route. But I think we've all agreed that while we're beavering away on our own patches, there is merit in trying to join us all up, and it would I say certainly on the business case, it would make a stronger impact. And also, I mean, there is an argument that it is a strategic route linking across to National Cycle Route 7. So yeah, and we've got a fair head of steam from the politicians on it. We need to wait and see where that goes. But I think because it's likely, I think, to be developed in phases rather than the whole thing get funded. Although I think there are opportunities at the moment with the consultation on the strategic transport project review 2 document, which is out. I think all communities that are interested in cycle paths should respond to that to get more money put into that particular element of the budget.
So which consultation was that, Jeff?
It's a Scottish Government. It's STPR2. If you Google it, it's Scottish Transport Project Review 2 consultation. It only went out for consultation the end of January. There's 6 basic themes in it, but certainly active travel routes is one of the key themes in it. So it's a chance to put in 2 penneth.
Neil's just put that up. Thank you, Neil. Yeah, so I'm just coming back to like Wendy's question there. I think part of the reason for asking that, because I was at the same meeting that Wendy was at, when I think in terms of the King's Highway, I think when the discussions were happening about Aberfoyle connecting to Stirling, that there was a suggestion that actually maybe that should be done via the King's Highway, and that maybe, you know, the communities that could be part of that development group maybe could be included Aberfoyle as well.
As people probably know, there's a railway line from Buchleivi to Cobbleland, which links with the railway line we already have as a cycle path to Aberfoyle. So it's especially as a commuter route for those of us who have the puff to commute to Stirling. That's the most obvious route, but I'm also not holding my breath that it's going to happen that soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think the logic is that if we could get this linear route, as many cross connections as possible would make sense to Aberfoyle. Obviously, Cambus Barron should be linked in. I know Thornhill are keen as well. Quite what the route would be, it's not entirely clear, but in doing some background research, I think there's some Nature Scott research reports which do show, as you'd expect, that a network of routes has a much bigger impact than a linear route. Mm-hmm. So the more we can join up all of these initiatives into a network, the bigger the impact will be.
Okay, that's great.
In which case, can I join the group?
So there you go. You've got a volunteer to join your group. Alan, I see. Oh, hang on. I think, Alan, is that your point related to the King's Highway? I can see.
Just in general terms, yes. I mean, I think I take the point about networks, which are important. And what we've been trying to do in Strathblane is create a network within the village and a network of links to paths that exist out of the village. But there's a kind of dichotomy in looking at cycle and multi-user paths between the active travel theme and the recreational cycling theme. Now, you can convince people that they will commute by cycle between Aberfoyle and Stirling and so on, but I think it's unlikely that many people will do that. So what we're talking about with these long distance paths is recreational cycling. Whereas if we want to, you know, get cars off the road, so to speak, particularly within villages like Strathblane, what we need is to get a paths network, particularly one that will access cycles, that will see people going to the co-op by bike instead of driving their cars several hundred yards into the co-op car park.
I think that's right, but there is an element, it came up in our King's Highway meeting, that we may get some benefit of the secondary pupils cycling to school instead of being transported by car. Yeah. If there was a safe off-road route to get the over 12s or whatever cycling to school, I think it's a strong travel benefit. But you're right, your general point is right. There is a cycling route being developed between Killearn and Balfron. There is, indeed, and I think that's the hope that it would. With the specific aim of accessing school, which I think is highly desirable. Yeah. I mean, there might be a little commuting from Gargunnock to Stirling. I think there are one or two people do it at the moment, but it would never be very great, I don't think. Although electric bikes do make it more feasible.
Mm-hmm.
And I should say quickly, I'm not opposed to recreational cycle routes, the more the merrier, but I'm just making the point that there has been a shift in emphasis in national funding and the approach to the creation of more multi-user paths.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
I mean, the business case would have to do, I mean, health benefits as well, and you know, hopefully revival of village economies.
Can we bring Helen in, because she's been waiting very patiently with her hand up for a while? Helen, did you want to come in with a question?
Yeah, I'm just unblocking myself. Yeah, I'm in calendar, and we're just in the middle stage of doing the local place plan. And at one point that we have a very positive response from Stirling relating to a riverside walk. But what I'm getting from the community is this need for cycling paths. But what I'm finding is that they aren't actually considering them as all access. I think the cyclists are quite selfish. However, there is definitely a drive towards a route to Doon, for example, which, I mean, I've been talking to Neil at Doon and Deanston about other sort of transport links, but also up to Aberfoyle. So calendar is definitely in the market, or for interconnecting cycle routes. We obviously have the national cycle N7, I think it is, but it doesn't quite join up as well as it could do. So if there's any group going that is in our neck of the woods, well, I think I'd definitely like to talk to them.
Okay, that's good to hear, actually. But I'm kind of conscious there's a lot of information that we're all sort of sharing. I did see Kelly's good suggestion about, can we share recommended people or consultants doing feasibility studies, just so we can start putting a list together of who we think are good and we should be speaking to. So we can definitely do that after this meeting. Obviously, this is probably the beginning of a discussion or a beginning of a way forward as an area. I also wanted to just sort of throw our hat in the ring with LEADER in terms of what's happening with our funding, because obviously we are European, well, we were European funded, we're no longer European funded. So at the moment there is discussions with Scottish Government about what will replace LEADER, and we're in like an interim year at the moment where we're doing these test of change pilots, which I think some of you might have come across because we've been funding some climate projects, Climate Nudge Fund, and also visitor management in our area. But this is temporary until the replacement funding comes in. So we are sort of promised that there will be replacement funding. We don't know exactly when it will be. It was actually announced in the government's budget spending review in November, December, that there's 11 million for community-led local development, which is another name for LEADER. So we are hopeful that there will be funds coming forward, and actually, because that 11 million is just for 1 year, so that's actually not just our area, it's for whole of Scotland, but we want to be in a prime place ready to access those funds. So we are keen to ensure that we have got projects, and possibly more in a more thematic way. So the focusing on cycle paths, although taking board Helen's point, it's not just about cyclists, just means a path that is suitable, at least for cyclists to go on, because it means other wheeled transport can use them too, or non-car transport. But the other thing I just wanted to flag up, the local action, the LEADER local action group, we still call ourselves LEADER, even though technically the LEADER doesn't exist anymore, but is to put some LEADER officer time into supporting some groups through our Climate Nudge Fund as a way of, I suppose, manipulating the funds that we do have available at the moment, how we can best support you as communities with your plans in any way, whichever community, because you're all in our eligible area. So to put some officer time into how we might best support you in the short term. With it, obviously, we hope there'll be more funds coming beyond April this year. But if there is anything we can help you with just now, whether it is, putting together briefs or organizing to get the feasibility studies or the concept studies or the detailed design, because obviously we had a bit of a whistle-stop tour there of some of the steps involved. So wherever you are in your process of your particular projects, or even things we've not yet thought about, but we're really quite taken aback how many communities are getting involved in path projects. So if there is a way, we are quite keen to put some time into doing that and using some funding for that. So not really expecting you to tell me or tell us right now, but if you could, because I think everybody will have my email address or Jason's. Jason, I'm not sure, are you able to put your camera on so people can see you? Because I can see that you're there.
Yep, sorry, Anne-Michelle, I've just been on there.
Twice, actually. I've just realised you're on twice. Just so that, because I think some of you will have met Jason. So Jason's been working on our cycle tourism project. So the point that Alan and others were making about the recreational cyclists as cycling as opposed to active travel cycling, which obviously has always been quite separate, but actually as we kind of review what the way forward, even with recreational cycling, we can see infrastructure is one of the key barriers, and this is where the crossover with active travel is very strong. So Jason, we're just seeing a blank screen.
Oh.
I'm not sure what's it was just more to say hello. That
Yeah, so basically, just sorry about the camera not working. I don't know what's going on there, but basically a key part of the cyclotourism project has been the report, which is basically evaluating the leisure cycle offering across the area. And obviously a key component of that is going to be you know, what the gaps are in terms of strategic routes. And I know obviously tonight everyone's main interest is accessing paths for walking and cycling for local community use. But of course, if you look at it in a wider strategic concept, there's much more potential use for visitors, and a lot of these paths could actually be important links for the wider cyclotourism offering. So that's something that I've been looking at and working through on the report. And I think it's probably important to recognise that, you know, one of the biggest opportunities for funding and support would come through Sustrans, and the Sustrans Places for Everyone Fund, which is actually closed at the moment, but going to be opening up again in this summer, with awards going out most likely in autumn 2022. So really now is a good time to be thinking about this, and looking at what potentially are realistic paths and opportunities within your areas, with a view to perhaps looking to get support from Sustrans, at least not as much for a feasibility study to take that forward.
Yep. So thanks, Jason. That's any final questions or comments to the speakers or to any of us, actually? I'm conscious we've got a few other people on the call.
Michelle. So I don't know if you know, data protection is an issue here, but is it possible for us to share each other's contact details?
Well, we've asked everyone to put actually their email, contact details in the chat with a view so we can share. So if everyone who's happy to share their email addresses can put them in the chat, we can then circulate. So for anyone who hasn't yet done that, because that, I think we said that right at the beginning. So fabulous. Oh, lots of addresses going in. That's good. Because obviously we can share. So this workshop's also been recorded. So there were quite a few people who wanted to attend this evening who couldn't. So but wanted to be able to watch it later, and also to share the presentations if the speaker's happy for those to be shared as well. That would be really helpful. But thank you very, very much, everyone, particularly our speakers, but also the audience too, with sharing with you some of your plans or what's going on with your in your communities. We are really keen to make some of this happen. We are very aware that a lot of these projects do take a very long time, but hopefully seeing what some communities have actually achieved with that persistence, as I think Bridget described it, but also in, you know, St. Fillan's and Strathblane, you know, that it might not be immediate, but what you achieve in the longer term is actually quite amazing. I had a particularly amazing photograph from Jeff of the Glentarkin viaduct or bridge. Looks more like a viaduct to me, but really quite a piece of architecture that's been achieved up there, and also the opening up of the railway tunnel. These are major achievements, and I know they're not cheap, but I think what you get in return is worth way more than the pounds that are spent on them. So I think LEADER is just one of the, we're not the biggest funder for cycle infrastructure, but I know there is a keenness to support, and we have supported in the last programme, and as Jeff said, because obviously St. Fillan's is actually in Perthshire, so some of the paths, or most of the paths, not some, most of the paths that St. Fillan's have built have been funded through the Perth and Kinross LEADER programme. One of the section, the Loch Ernhead section, was funded through our programme, but, or funded part, I should say. Sustrans obviously with the bulk, but sometimes, you know, you just need a little bit more, and that's, and we didn't actually dwell too much on the different sources of funding. Oh, Jeff, you've got your hand up there. But
only to say that although Sustrans are the main funding, they like they like other people to contribute. I think it's more just a warm fuzzy feeling than anything too substantial, but I think they really appreciate other funders. I think the cooperation of funders is quite important.
Okay, that's good to hear, actually. That yeah, that we certainly have been working over the the last 2 years much more closely with Sustrans than we ever had before. So that could be as a result of Sustrans' desire to work more closely with other funders and more locally based funders. Alan, you're still on mute though, so.
Just a quick point. My experience is that talking with the funders is a very good thing. Developing a relationship with the funders and discussing a project with them, and maybe even taking little bits of their advice and so on, it helps along the road to getting the funding.
No, I would completely agree. The more that your funders know what you're doing from a very early stage, actually, yeah, the more doors that suddenly opens. I know the way that we operate is slightly different to other funders, but we have a partnership with our local action group members. So often it isn't just our funding that you are accessing, but because we have the council, we have the national park, we have other links to other organisations, quite often we can help get other funders on board as well, other funds that sometimes we didn't know existed. So it is a good point, Alan, get the relationships going early on. Great. I see one last question from Alison about maps. Is there any maps about these paths that we can share with walking and cycling groups to use? So each area, each community, do you mean path like leaflets type paths, Alison? Is that, yeah? So each community has its own sort of section of leaflets, which are usually on their website for downloading. We don't yet, unless Jason tells me, or Jim, actually, Jim might know better, actually. There isn't a central repository, I don't think, for all the leaflets. So
not at the moment, Anne-Michelle, it's kind of organic. There's obviously the national cycle routes, there's maps for them, but generally speaking, a lot of communities kind of do their own thing. Probably the best place of call is just to look at their websites and hopefully be able to download PDFs from there.
Also, Harvey Maps have got quite a lot of good routes, Forth Valley and Perthshire, and little local maps as well, walking and cycling maps. They're quite good.
Okay, Jim, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I'm currently working with communities in the national park, so working with 6 communities, and we're going to produce a meander leaflet that lists local paths round about that area. So Aberfoyle is going to be one of those, Alison. I've been talking to Bike Trossachs on that. So we're doing, currently, the first ones that will come out will be Drimmen, Aberfoyle, Callander, and then closely followed by Killin, Loch Goyle Head, and another once I got round to doing the research.
No, my thoughts were just that, we've got the Walk in the Park group, on that kind of thing, and they're always looking sometimes for just new walks that are not too far for them to drive. And, with all these paths and everything I've seen tonight, I'm like, God, some of the ladies in that would just love that. They could go and have a wee cup of tea in Bridge of Allen or, Gargunnock or somewhere and walk these paths. And I just thought it's a good idea to share them. But
no, very good.
So I work for the Countryside Trust, and we run the Walk in the Park programme. So we do share those routes with each other, and we're currently looking at maybe publishing the Walk in the Park routes as well.
Yeah, and also, Jim, go and stick us some stuff for Strathard News.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds like some negotiating going on there. So conscious of the time, thank you again to the speakers in particular, but everyone for joining us. I know some people have had to slip off there, but this is our first of our shared learning events. So we do hope to have another one next month on a different topic. I think the topic, we don't have a date yet, but is smart villages. So let's put that one in, in your mind of if something you would like to know a little bit more about and watch this space. Thank you very much, everyone, and go and enjoy the rest of your evening.